Welcome to our Camano Wildlife Habitat program. So we have been doing this for 22 years, and starting in January, in 2 months, we will have done programs. It'll be our 23rd years of doing backyard wildlife programs. So welcome. And every now and then we do one on Backyard Wildlife Habitat 101. So thank you for coming for the evening. And so I just have to remember how to click things. So the whole point of our Backyard Wildlife Project on Camano is to share our space with the critters. So we're an island in harmony with nature, yard at a time, and this is our way to think about all the critters. And we love Camano for its natural spaces, and we love it for the critters that we share it with. So we've got the mammals, and then we've got the butterflies and the birds, and it's fun to see the various ones around. I know a hummingbird was kind of scolding me today because I do need to change the feeder for him or her. So, a Camano Wildlife Habitat Project involves, providing wildlife habitat and linking the corridors. So you can see from 1984 to 2020, we've lost a lot of vegetation and a lot of development has happened. So we can't do too much with the regulations. We can try, but it's a slow process. But we can do things in our backyards, and that's what the Wildlife Habitat Project is all about. It's how we can do things in our own yard by providing food, water, shelter, places to raise young, and practicing sustainable gardening techniques. And by doing that, we kind of actually can link our yards. So this, even though we've got a lot of houses, that houses have backyards, and it could be if you have a small lot or if you have acreage. But there's areas in the yards that can be like Russell Link. He is a wildlife biologist with Fish and Wildlife in Washington State. Talks about areas 1, 2, and 3, and so area 1 gets into the close to the house. Area 2 is like the pathways to get to the garage and to the house, and then the area 3 is kind of the back part of the yard. That if you link up those backyards, all these areas that are just house. If we link the backyards, we can maybe kind of reestablish some corridors for the animals. So that's what we're thinking about when we want a native plant wildlife habitat type of idea, not only for ourselves and enjoy the sanctuary, but for the critters as well. So this is not what you call a wildlife habitat. So when you have a lawn and a tree and a bush or a hedge type of thing, this is sterile. And so our idea is it's basically to get ourselves off of the lawn and think about how we can use the yard for a bit of an oasis for ourselves, a refuge, and a place for the critters. So this one is my yard. So I moved to Camano. Actually, I moved in on November 11th, 1994. So I've been here 30 years. And the top of the hill there with the snow is like January 95. And that there were, and we had a lawn and a big cedar tree. And that's about it. Then in 2007 is when we had kind of planted the left side of the yard down on the pathway. And that is, we have a ground cover and trees and shrubs on the left side. And the right side, we're starting to do that. So I started the Backyard Wildlife Project in 2002. So 1994, there was, lawn. 2002, we had accomplished the left side of our yard. And then, and on the right side, now we've got that filled in. So our yard is a layering type of thing. So rather than have a tree and a lawn that's very sterile and not doing anything, our yard has ground cover, shrubs and trees, and there's places for all the different animals and birds and various things. So it's very nice to go to on a hot summer day because it's shady and cool, while our neighbors have lawns on each side of it. I live on the water down below, and the top is just backyard wildlife habitat. But our neighbors, their houses are up there with lawns, and it's just brown grass. Luckily, they're not just bothering watering it. And so on a hot day, we've got an oasis. So, and the other thing is, since we live on an island, everything we do affects Puget Sound. So it's a matter of thinking about what we're doing on our in our yards goes beyond our yards, and especially um, you know our um, all our runoff goes into Puget Sound. So in these little backyard wildlife habitat yards here, they all have things in common. So you can see they've got some water, they've got some food, they've got some shelter, and places to raise young, which are the four basic needs for wildlife. So, and it's basically like us, we need all that too. So they're living creatures and that's what they need, just like we do. And so here are some basic steps. Oh, notice I've got this layering little drawing right here. So the idea with backyard wildlife habitats is to do that layering. So you've got trees, you've got shrubs, and you've got ground cover. And if you go to our website and look at our native plant list, that's how we have that's how we give you ideas on native plants. It's by thinking of the layering idea. So when you look at our native plant list on the website, and you can get a copy and to print off. It's made so that you can go, if you have a narrow yard or a wide yard, there's two sides for that, and it goes with dry and sunny, wet and shady, and it has various aspects, but we divide all those aspects up into layering. So there's ground cover, understory, shrubs, and taller trees. So the first thing is kind of see what you have. And like in my yard that I showed before, it was like we didn't change it all into wildlife habitat right away. That's too much of it's too difficult, and it kind of wears you down. So, but right now the only grass in the yard is in the lower part of our driveway, and the little bunnies kind of like that. But that's growing in. But other than that, we have. We don't have any yard anymore, but we do have wonderful habitat, and we don't have to water anything. And that's all a period of time. You know, things started out kind of there wasn't much, and we did it in parcels. So there's all sorts of types of habitat sites. So the National Wildlife Federation certifies wildlife habitats, and so most of them are homes, but people do their workplaces, their farms, the schools. Like Elger Bay is a certified wildlife habitat on the island. And the National Wildlife Federation started out the program with the idea of people in the city doing it. So apartments and rooftops are a big thing in the city. Here we're trying to get people to we have larger spaces. So whether it's a yard or a acreage, we're hoping people do it. So we link the corridors. But in the city, those little places make a difference. Even like little boulevards make a difference. So we even have St. Aidan's was on our garden tour several years ago, and they are certified as a wildlife habitat too. And most of the parks on the island, I think all of them are certified. So when you thinking about, you know, you're assessing your stuff, you need to look at the various ways. Like, do you have a slope? Is it shady? Are things moist? What do you have in the yard now? What has it been used for in the past? Where your pathways are, where you can kind of set aside and not bother going. All that is done in a site inventory, and I don't think we have that on the website. But if anyone's interested, you can email Camano Wildlife Habitat.org, and I can send you that, or Roxy, I can get you the PDF to put on the website too. Because we have an actual site inventory. It's about 5 pages that you can kind of go through and look to see what you have to work with. So there, and I've talked about the 4 basic elements, but the first is food. And that food can be, ideally it's native plants. Native plants, you don't have to think about things. You don't have to clean things. You can just let things be messy. So like right now, I never, my ocean spray that comes out in June that I just love. I think it's the most beautiful bush. It has all these little bitty white flowers. Now the chickadees are eating the seeds off of those. So I didn't bother with the messiness because I know that the chickadees will go on it and they'll dangle and they'll eat them and they'll be very happy. So, so native plants sometimes means a little letting things, not only planting the native plants, but also leaving them to do their things so that they're providing the needs of wildlife throughout the year. Okay, and you can see the snag in the right-hand corner, and how that is actually some trees are actually they have more life with them when they're dead as snags or logs. They're incredibly useful for the wildlife, alive or dead. So the the plants, they have the foliage, the nuts, fruits, seeds, sap, nectar, pollen, roots, and all the different things are accessible at different points in the year. So plants will do different things throughout the year, and not only as food sources, but they're also cover and shelter. And then the supplemental feeders, these are nice accessories, especially in the winter when it gets real cold and when the few days that we have snow. And like the hummingbirds, the Anna's hummingbirds stay here year round now, so the hummingbird feeders are definitely being used and a good supplement. But if you're doing feeders, the idea is that you become responsible for cleaning them, and so you can't just put them up and just keep adding to them. They do require maintenance and cleaning. So the best source is just having the plants, but the supplemental feeders do help out, especially when the weather gets more inclement. Um, and here are just some different native plants in the Northwest, and and you can see that they use various aspects. So the black hawthorn is good with the berries. The salmonberry in the spring is good, um, and the berries are eaten. It's also great cover because it's bushy, um, and it's so nice to see in the spring as it's one of the early bloomers. Thimbleberry, that's always nice, and more berries. And some of these, like thimbleberry and salmonberry, they spread out a bit. So you're thinking a little wider areas, more like in that area 3 in the back part, um, because they need a little elbow room. Oregon grape, I think it's my favorite. And that's nice. It's got the flowers in the springtime and the berries in the later on in the summer. And it grows pretty well too. It just seems to thrive. And there's a low version and a tall version, and I just think I just love it. Dogwood, here's something this likes a little bit wetter soil than others, like the Oregon grape. That can kind of work in more drought conditions, especially the tall. And but you can see the dogwood, that's good in various times of the year. And the asters, no, this is good for the bugs. And people seem to, they don't necessarily like insects and such, but the birds eat a lot of insects. And so that's one of their main feeds are the insects. So having plants that kind of are good for those is good. And they're quite pretty, and they're later on in the season as well. People like to attract butterflies, and the thing about attracting butterflies is they have a life cycle. So if you want to help the butterflies, it's thinking about their different stages. So, their beginnings with the egg, the larva, the pupa, and all the way to when they become adults. Then the next deal is water. And with the water, this is more difficult for some people to have, but it doesn't necessarily have to be too hard to have, because it can be as simple as a um, a bottom of a pan, for a plant pan, and if you put some rocks down so there's just like it's not a steep slope, um, you'll have a water source. And water sources are also in the plant, like the frog here in this this big leaf. There's a little bit of water in where the leaf comes in, and there you have water available. And so the bird bath, when you it's good to know when you have bird baths, you want to think about the birds and not how pretty the bird bath is, because they have a lot of decorative bird baths that are actually kind of dangerous for the wildlife and the birds. They might be real steep, and they might be really slippery. And so what you want is something kind of shallow, and that is not a slippery bottom. And so sometimes just putting gravel and different rocks will get rid of the slipperiness, and adding some rocks in there to give the birds a little stepping stone, because steep edges are bad, because they could not, the smaller ones might have problems getting out, and the slipperiness is bad. And you also need to think about cleaning them, because if you have anything you add to the environment that's not natural, it means that we need to make sure that they stay cleaned. You can get elaborate with ponds and such as well. So, and here's a list of various types of water sources. So on the application to become a wildlife habitat, it'll have, these are the things that are listed on it. And note the puddling area. So the butterflies, they like those little mud puddles. So there's various ways that the wildlife gets their water. And it's also the snags or the logs in your yard, because they kind of soak up all that wetness, and some of the insects and such that's their water source. So it's quite um, it's quite cool what nature does in providing for the critters if we let that natural cycle go on. Um, when you're thinking about a bird bath, you want to think about what's around it. So the birds like to have little avenues to get there, so some branches and trees and things to sit on, so they don't make like a direct path through an empty area. It's like they can choose their route, and then they can go off and wait a little bit and come back. And they don't want a lot underneath the bird bath, because that's where like cats and predators could hide. So you have to think about keeping the under bit of the bird bath open, so that there's no one hiding, and things above that are kind of over where they can perch. So you have a safe area, and your bird bath doesn't become a bird feeder for the hawks and cats. And there on the left side is my ocean spray that I like so much. Okay, so various ways to have water available, like the running water. So if you like to do that, the birds and the bumblebees and the hummingbirds all like the moving water. And there we have a blue jay, and there are heaters for the winter. So because that's kind of when it freezes, water's still a necessary part of for the wildlife. And so I know I have to go with my hot water and do the changing throughout the day on the really cold days. And they actually have feeders that keep the water warm available as well. So various other aspects with thinking in the puddling and way of doing things. And I already mentioned providing overhead cover, and to limit what's below, so that this bird bath in the picture doesn't really have much above it, and it has a lot below it. So it's great for predators above and below, but not so great for safety for the bird. So anytime we're providing a source, whether it's food or water, or that we have to think about when we're adding the supplementary stuff, are we doing good, or are we making it more hazardous for the wildlife? So it's being kind of aware of what we're putting into the environment, and that it's truly going to be helpful. So shelter A lot of the shelter aspect is also can be in the food. So what you plant for food can also be a shelter, or you can, and that's both the supplementary as well as the natural. So lots of different shelter sources for the various critters that could be there. So where it shows, the bramble patch, the ground cover, that's getting into that idea of layering. Brush piles. So rather than throwing away a lot of your debris when you're kind of cleaning things up, if you create a brush pile, that's a good hidey hole for a lot of critters. And rather than having, with our septic systems and our drain fields, we can't have things that have deep roots. But if you think about meadow prairie type of tall grasses and things, that would be okay to have on there. And so that's always good to have. So there's all sorts of ways to have shelter. Again, if you're going to put in like a roosting box or bird houses, it's a matter of being responsible about that they're clean and where you put them. So um, so whenever you add things, remember you're thinking about what you're doing. Also, what you're removing. So, you know, um, if you're going to take out blackberries because they're really kind of they're invasive, then you want to add like salmonberry or snowberry or a thimbleberry, which are native and are better for the environment. But you're not going to you're adding another bramble patch if you're taking out the invasive blackberry bramble patch. And oh, there was something about oh, and like if you cut need to uh, take care of a tree, you have a fear of the tree falling or it's starting to die, you can always, leave a snag that's not going to fall on into anything because that's a tremendous source for wildlife. And those cavity holes are good for nesting as well as the insects in there. They're good for eating the insects. And so, and the same with the logs. They're immensely useful for the wildlife. Okay, so I mentioned the layering, and I will again and again because it really, one, it makes it a really nice place to live. You have this sanctuary in your yard, and it's quite pleasant. And the other, it's really doing something for the wildlife. A tree and grass is sterile. But when you have, your big leaf maple, your Oregon grape, and some strawberries for ground cover, what you have is a nice environment, that's quite pleasant to sit in and enjoy on a hot summer day. And this was on the garden tour, and this place is a juniper beach. So it was a little garden on the land on the slope side of Juniper Beach, and she had a narrow little strip. And oh, it was just a delightful spot, and you would never know that you can kind of peek through and see that there's some water and grass on the other side of the road, and that was kind of parked out with the lawn and maybe a bush and the water in the beach house versus having this lovely environment. And note what she does with her yard art. So that's another thing. People sometimes think backyard wildlife habitats are a little bit messy, but if you add some yard art, it all makes it purposeful. Our backyard wildlife sign also does that, but it shows that this is intentionally done like this to provide for wildlife, and it's nice. So yard art is a great way to make your yard look purposeful if it's a little bit messier with some seed pods or overgrowth. So the places to raise young, a lot of this is with the food in the cover type the plants that you've planted for that. And so and it's all sorts of things as well, the mature trees, the grasses. I know that my husband was wanting to do something with the sword ferns in the yard. He thought the old fronds were messy, so we wanted to do something with it. Well, the towhee that was nesting in the swordford didn't think that was appropriate and gave him a little scolding, and he went away. But so there's a lot of nesting birds that are in those low things. So it's like in the springtime when you want to try to clean things up, that's nesting season. So thinking about, having, um, the growth there that is um, provide, you don't need to have a really tidy yard when you're having a nature sanctuary in your yard. It can be a little bit more helter-skelter with the way things are going with the branches and such. So let me look to see if um, here and again, the dead trees and snags, they're just wonderful. And I think this week I'm in a snag mode. I just think they're cool. Um, but all of these on the list, they're good for providing um, places to raise young. It's interesting. I was listening to an Aldo Leopold workshop. They were doing they were doing something in Rochester, Minnesota, where I was visiting my mom, and they're located in Wisconsin, where Aldo Leopold's cabin was, and so they were talking about how the um the the cavity nesters are having a hard time, and that's because the ones that are flying, making the long migrations, they're coming back like they always have because they're geared to the sun and what's going on with the timing and then how the sun's rotation and what the seasons are geared with, versus the local migrators. Like here we have ones that might go up the mountain a little bit and then they come down to the lowlands. So what happens is those localized migrators are getting to the cavities before the ones that are making the big journeys. So that's where nesting boxes do help out, because with climate change, things are changing a little bit. So the ones so some are arriving later and the cavities are gone. And the trees, there aren't as many. We're losing habitat. So that's where nesting boxes come in handy, especially for the cavity nesters. Okay. Oh, and it's to know that, you can put up a nesting box, but not, that's only the cavity dwellers that are going to use those. I know during our first years of backyard wildlife, we gave out birdhouses to people when they certified, so we could become a community wildlife habitat. And I went to a friend's house, and there was a robin's nest on top of the bird box, that nesting box that he got, because robins are shelf nesters. They don't go into the cavities. So it kind of served two things that day, because that you've got the cavity and the top for a nest on top of it. Anyway, so and down here it says host plants for caterpillars. So remember, if you want a butterfly habitat, it's thinking about the whole life of the butterfly. Okay, here we got the snags and the woodpecker trees. The woodpeckers, like the pileated woodpeckers, that's one of the things that we're missing out on Camano when we're losing our big trees, because both the bald eagles and the pileated woodpeckers need large trees to be able to have their nests or their cavities for the woodpeckers. And rock piles and brush piles are great. So I know you can see the salamanders resting in the sun on the rocks, or I've been seeing some garter snakes alongside the road, and so having those available is good. The marshland, and we're real we're really lucky that we have these beaver areas on the island that you can kind of see the beaver environment. So you can go to over by the Casa, the Cancun Road. There's a viewing area there, as well as down at Elger Bay Nature Trail. And then we have a heron colony on the island as well. So lots of different spots on the island. So besides the food, water, shelter, and places to raise young, there's also thinking about what you're doing with your in addition. So it's a matter of being responsible with your gardening. So reducing the lawn, growing natives, that's always helpful. We live on an island, so water conservation is extremely important because we want to make sure we have enough water for all the people. And we also want to, um, and that it will keep, that we're not overusing it and just running it off into the sound. Um, we're to be a community, to be a wildlife habitat, you don't necessarily have to be perfect, but we're thinking that as people realize that they're feeding the birds, they're enjoying that, that maybe that will help eliminate pesticide and fertilizer use, and that people will be a little bit more environmentally conscious about what they're putting into their yards because they have wildlife that's also using the yards. And and then there's also the action steps. So Camano is a community wildlife habitat, and that's where we're doing something beyond. We're thinking that beyond our one backyard wildlife habitat that we're having both for to help critters, but also to enjoy. That we're working with other people, and it's become quite a trend. So not only do we have 1,066 certified wildlife habitats on Camano. Camano is one of 18 community wildlife habitats in the state. We were the second in the state, and there are 168 or 173, I forgot to check, before starting community wildlife habitats in the nation, and Camano was the 10th. So another thing to think about with what you're doing in the yard is the leaves. So right now people have been getting rid of the leaves, and the leaves do a tremendous amount of for the yard. It's like the tree when it drops its leaves, it's enough fertilizer for it to survive. And besides it providing the nutrients for itself, it has all that leaf duff is helping with the insects that are kind of going under there, and birds can go in and get some insects, and so it's the leaves are actually helping the tree live as well as the critters, the insects, the birds thrive as well. So rather than rake it all up, it's good to just leave it. And I know in our yard, we get the leaves off the driveway. We have a long driveway. But the ones that are in our wildlife habitat, that just sits there, all year and then all winter long. And then it's miraculously our ground cover just pops up every spring, and you'd never know that the leaves were covering it because they deteriorate. And in the process, they're helping. If you want this handout, I think Roxy was going to put it in the chat, but it's also on the website, the CamanoWildlifeHabitat.org. And there's a flip side to this, it's page 2 that gives you tips. So this is just the cover page, and then another page with some tips on how you can use the leaves and not just rake them up. And another nice handout that there's 2 pages to this, and it's in the chat, I think, or it's on our website, and it's how to reduce your lawn, because it's a process, and rather than trying to do everything at once, you can do it in steps and stages, and so you can slowly get a wildlife habitat. And another thing to think about is the impact of what we do in our yards with climate change. And so the leaf blowers that some people are using, they don't have any restrictions on their air quality and whatnot, and they're quite big polluters. So are lawnmowers. And with a backyard wildlife habitat and ground cover, you don't need to bother with the lawnmower. But this sustainability climate change booklet is quite interesting. And here are some things that you can think about on how climate change and gardening can work together, or how you can help. So the gas-powered yard tools and there's no restrictions on what they are putting into the air, so they're actually worse than, you know, some big vehicles that do have restrictions. And like reducing the invasive species and putting natural plants in makes the plants are useful, and they have a purpose rather than just taking away space. Where like the blackberries, they if you're going to take them out, it's nice to put something that is native in its space. But they do provide some berries and whatnot. But if you can go to the nursery and get these beautiful plants that are sterile, and all they do is suck up water, and they're not providing any wildlife habitat, any food, water, shelter, place to raise young. They're just kind of sterile, but they're pretty. So you can get pretty and useful as well. And that there are some that are, not all ornamental plants or exotics are invasive, and they're not all sterile. So we have a list of non-native plants that are useful in the yard. So you don't have to be a purist and just be totally native plant. Okay. Um, Creating a rain garden, you kind of need this. They don't. Not all places are rain garden appropriate. So you might want to check with like the Snohomish Conservation District if you're interested in rain garden, because they're kind of real useful for helping with that. Green roofs, haven't heard about those very often for a while, but some people have been doing that with success. We just had the big windstorm, and so now the trees are at risk. So I hope you are a tree advocate to help them stay up. And so that's in your backyards, what you can do for climate change as well as sustainable gardening. And then if you want to be part of a natural trend going on, there's the backyard wildlife habitat sites. Now the National Wildlife Federation says certified wildlife habitats, but they're all over the country. And there's more than 200,000, probably close to 300,000 now that are certified. The National Wildlife Federation started certifying yards in 1973. And it was originally, it was kind of an urban type of project for the cities. And um, then it got into uh, the community wildlife habitat aspect. And I know on Camano, we thought, rather than being in a place where people were trying to restore things on Camano, our idea was we were hoping that people would keep things in the yard rather than taking it out. So rather than ripping out 5 acres of native plants to put in a lawn, we are hoping that people will uh, keep a lot of those native plants in the 5 acres and just have a small area for the house and a little bit of yard. And anyway, community. So there's quite a few community wildlife habitats, and that's an action step because it's gotten a lot of people to be involved. But you can see that it's a bit of a national trend. In fact, different organizations are doing it. So the National Wildlife Federation does the certified wildlife habitats, and I think they were one of the starters. But Audubon does something, the Conservation District does something with the same idea of creating a wildlife habitat. The Washington State Department of Wildlife, Fish and Wildlife has a little certification process as well that National Wildlife Federation used to link up with them, and you could certify both at the same time. They stopped doing that a couple of years ago. But to certify is pretty easy. It's a simple checklist of how you're providing food, water, places to raise young. You just have to mention 3 ways you're providing food, 1 way for water, because that's the most difficult, and then a couple for places to raise young and a couple for cover, which are pretty much the same as the plants you do for food, and then different ways that you're doing sustainable gardening in a couple. And the whole idea is that this is a process. So by certifying, one, you're part of a national trend. On Camano, you would be part of, we're working on getting 1,100 certified wildlife habitats on the island, and so it's part of a trend of, saying we care about our island in harmony with nature, and It also makes you conscientious. So like, you know, today I made sure that I filled up, I got the, the leaves out of my bird feeder or my bird bath because they were kind of, that they it got full of leaves rather than rain, I guess. And so, I'm conscientious about what I do. Or, when I do go to the nursery, I'll think about which plants are going to be helpful for the wildlife habitat. And so certifying makes me think about what I'm doing in my yard so that I'm more conscientious about having sharing my space with the critters. So it's a work in progress. It's not something that you have to be a purist when you start. Like for me, I had two cats in 2002 that were elder kitties, and they would still go outside, but at that stage they were pretty much just lying in sunbeams. And my two elder kitties now, who are 18 and a half, they don't go outside. They stepped outside maybe 3 times each in their lives, and they didn't know what to do, and they came right back in because the door was accidentally left open a little bit. So those girls, they don't know the outdoors, and they're safe, and so are the birds because cats kill a lot of birds. And so um, I grew into figuring out not to let my cats go out. And so that was evolution that we make with what we're doing in our yards. So you can think of it as this is what I'm doing now, and then maybe later on you want to add to some more steps to what you do. When you certify, um, you'll get a certificate that says you're a certified wildlife habitat, and you can also put up a sign. And the signs, you that you pay extra for those. So you certify, it's a $20 fee to certify, and with that you are oh it's you'll get the magazine for a year, the National Wildlife Magazine, and but you're certified for the life of living on the property. And then after a year, the National Wildlife Federation will ask if you want to be a member and continue getting the magazine, but you'll always be certified. The signs are $30 for the National Wildlife Ranger Rick sign and $15 for our Camano sign. That the artwork with the Towie is by Bev Paulson. But the both signs say, they kind of give purpose to the yard. We're providing food, water, shelter, places to raise young. And also, it's great advertising because people see the signs, and then I get a call and people want to know how they can be a certified wildlife habitat. And so it's a great advertising for the cause, and it also kind of gives your yard purpose. And so if it has a dandelion or two or some seeds pods on your branches, it's okay because it's a certified wildlife habitat helping the critters. And so this is an example of what someone did to their yard, kind of like you saw mine previously. And to go a step beyond being a certified wildlife habitat, a community wildlife habitat takes all those ideas of the food, water, shelter, and a place to raise young, but to go beyond individual into several in the community. So on Camano, we certified with 500. So when we had 500 wildlife habitats on the island, then we were able to be a community wildlife habitat. And with that, we decided that we needed to continue working on it because we still wanted to be an island in harmony with nature. So it's an action step for communities. So we certified the schoolyard habitat at Elger Bay, and the trail that goes near Elger Bay is it's a certified, Elger Bay Preserve is a certified wildlife habitat with a nature trail, and the kids use it as a nature classroom, and they have the amphitheater there. Then there's the beaver pond to look at, and so schoolyard habitats are real important for being able to get kids outside and enjoying the animals and nature. The senior center on Camano has the pathway, and we put that in with the idea that the kids at Oceloti could go over there and use that as a nature trail as well. Oceloti isn't as into the schoolyard habitat idea as Elder Bay is, but they have that pathway as well with the senior center since they're adjacent. Then you can take even the boulevard. So this is the National Wildlife Federation's first office in Seattle, and so they took their boulevard and turned that into a wildlife habitat. So it's kind of like the idea if you go to Kama Beach, that the parking lot at Kama Beach is that idea. So rather than have a big parking lot, they have, you know, the little boulevard or barriers or, you know, buffers in between the little parking areas. And the whole idea was to preserve habitat and to not just have a great big parking lot. So these are all the community wildlife habitats in Washington state. So Tukwila was the very first in 2002. That's what gave me the idea. I read this little bitty article in the National Wildlife magazine that talked about Tukwila being a community wildlife habitat. And they had to do a lot of restoration in order and getting people to make the plants. Camano, we're again, like, we're doing it so that people will some of them will not rip out the plants, and some of us have to restore what was previously ripped out. But the idea was that on Camano, we wanted to keep the natural habitat, and it's our action step. So rather than sob when the logging trucks were rolling off the island, we started the Wildlife Project as our action step to get people to think about, okay, I can do this in my yard, and I can work with other people in their yards. And I know someone who moved to the island, and she joined our Habitat Stewards program right like shortly after moving to the island. She heard about us, and rather than stripping their 5 acres of lawn and turning it into lawn, and she was excited about having a riding mower, she heard about us and she went the selective, you know, here's where the house will be, the rest is wildlife habitat. And so, you know, little bits are being saved rather than just having total wildlife habitat loss. And it's interesting, Whitby's here, so technically Island County is a wildlife habitat because we have both Camano and Whitby. And our Camano Island 1,100, nearly 1,100 habitats is quite close to the number that Seattle has. So we have quite a cool project with our habitats on Camano. And the idea is that the Seattle area, the Puget Sound region, is kind of like a regional community wildlife habitat because there's so many in the community in this area that are doing it. Because there's 18 and there's 168 in the nation. And this is Camano. So you can see how they're all spread out all throughout the island. So the idea is to kind of connect to the parks and restore some habitat. And this isn't the full 1,066 habitats, so we have more dots than what's shown. And that idea of having these habitats spread all throughout and linking up with, you know, the state parks are down here, then you've got not Elder Bay, or Elder Bay is over here, and then you've got Camano Ridge, and so the idea is to kind of link up those areas. And I was reading this book, Nature's Best Hope, this summer, or I was listening to it actually, and it's really quite interesting because it takes the whole idea of certified wildlife habitats into the idea of making a homegrown national park. So Douglas Ptolemy is saying, you know, our parks are like islands. You know, we've got parks here, here, and here, and that isn't necessarily totally the best way to do things because they're just islands with a lot of lost habitat in between. So Nature's Best Hope is to have a homegrown national park, which is certified wildlife habitats, you know, all all throughout that are connecting corridors. So I was really encouraged reading his book because it's exactly what community wildlife habitats are all about. It's all about linking backyards and reestablishing corridors. And that's what he's suggesting in this national homegrown national park. So if I went back and looked at that map that had all the different habitats in the U.S., that's the start of a homegrown national park, and it's all 1 yard at a time, but those 1 yards at a time do add up and make a difference. So here on Camano Island, here are some of the things we did. We did a planting down at Four Springs, down by the water, trying to create a buffer down by the lake. We used to work with orchards and have native plants and signage at orchards. That kind of fell by the wayside a little bit. And we do a lot of tabling. I'll be at the Snow Goose Festival in February. And then we were certified at Four Springs as a community wildlife habitat in August of 2005. So if you would like more information about the National Wildlife Federation, you can go there. They've got a lot of native plant information, and at our website, Roxy has done a fantastic job. So our native plant list is there, our application is there, the two handouts that I kind of showed with leaves and lawn reduction, they're there, all sorts of things. There are programs of various programs we've done on Zoom and handouts from our various speakers. They're all there available in the programs area of our website. So a lot of information about on CamanoWildlifeHabitat.org. And with that, the whole idea is to never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has, with Margaret Mead. And I know that I just love that idea, and then all our habitats are linking up, and now we have all these community wildlife habitats in the area that kind of link up, and I know it gives me hope. So if you're interested in wildlife habitats, join the club. It's a cool trend to be a part of. These books are also good references. Living with Wildlife and Landscaping for Wildlife, they're by Russell Link, and he is local. He lives on Whidbey Island, and he's with the Fish and Wildlife Department in Washington State. So those two books are real nice for knowing. It gives us the Pacific Northwest idea of things. Landscaping for Wildlife gives ideas about landscaping, and it has even it gives you boxes, boxes, how to make nesting boxes and various things that help with wildlife. Living with Wildlife, that gets into specific critters. So, if you have some issues with deer, it gives you some ideas about that. But the whole idea is that we're sharing our space. And there's one good story with the deer is that then there's another book, Gaia's Garden. And in that book, the guy, he dealt with the deers by creating this hedge. And hedgerows are so wonderful. They're much better than fences because the critters can get through them. Anyway, with the hedges, he had one side for the deer and one side for him. And I don't know if the deer really followed through with the idea, but that was his intent with, the deer delectables were on one side and the other side was for him. And another woman, a speaker we had a slug, and she just moved it over to her slug area of her garden. She just put it like on a shingle and moved it over. And then she planted plants that were like slug plants and non-slug plants. And so the slugs would go in between the non-slug plants to get to the slug area. And, it was called Living Peacefully with the Slugs. So there's ways to think of them as partners rather than nuisances. The National Wildlife Federation also has a book, and that's real helpful as well. So with that, thank you for listening to my spiel about backyard wildlife habitats on Camano. And we are just thrilled to be a community wildlife habitat and one of many in the nation. And if you're interested in starting one, let me know, and I can give you some ideas. So with that, any questions?
We have several questions in the chat.
Okay.
One was, where is the heron colony on the island? And I know that ours is officially off limits to people, but there's another one near that you can see at least from ID Road. What do you know about that one, Val?
That one is, it's not for publics to go to, so I'm not
Okay,
telling.
okay.
That land was purchased with the whole idea it was for the herons, and it was really a cool project. Um, Somebody came to the Whidbey Camano Land Trust and said, we would like we want to move, but we have this heron colony. What can you do? So one of the Friends of Camano Island Parks, he actually put money down on the property while the Whidbey Camano Land Trust worked to get people to save the heron colony. And its whole purpose was to save habitat and not have access.
Right, but from
It's
ID Road, sorry, go ahead.
to save to save the habitat. Um, anyway, that's a cool project because it was purely to save habitat for the critters.
Right. But from ID Road, we could see heron colony across near the Nature Conservancy. But I've never been there, so I think that is officially off limits too. Are there any heron colonies where you can see the herons?
Um, I don't know because my theory is that we should just let the heron colonies do their thing and stay away.
So there's a several video cameras. So I know
Mhm.
there's a heron camera on what's the one near Anacortes?
Oh, is it March Point?
Yeah, yeah, March Point. So
Yeah.
that's a great one.
And the cameras are great. The cameras are the great way to figure out, how they're raising the young, and they're just fabulous. I know I've been watching the Decorah Eagle since 2011, and you can't get a better look than that, and you're not disturbing them.
Yeah, I think they're
The whole
very,
etiquette
very
of,
worried about being disturbed.
yeah.
That causes the colonies to fail. All right, so another question. I certified my backyard habitat through the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Should I also certify through the National Wildlife Federation?
Well, you can. I mean, you're doing what's necessary with that certification. But if you want to be part of our project and part of like the community wildlife habitat, it'd be cool because then I can count your number and we can say we've got that many more. Then the money goes to National Wildlife Federation, which is a nice organization because they do advocacy and education, and I like that because without education, the advocacy. I think the two are necessary to work together. So that's what I especially like about National Wildlife Federation because they're doing things to protect the wildlife habitat, but they're also teaching us what we can do in our yards to understand wildlife habitat so that we want to protect it and advocate for it. So and you get the magazine for a year, so it's a $20 well spent, and then we get to count. We get another number.
Yeah, so what other questions do people have? You can unmute and ask your questions verbally, or you can type them in the chat. What other questions and concerns? I think everybody's still reeling from the shock of the storm and getting power back on and everything. But
And here's when to think, the branches and things that have come down, they can be brush piles.
yeah,
And so in that area 3 of the yards, they can, you can put them into that area 3 and pile them up, and they're just going to decay. But in the meantime, they're hidey holes, especially with winter coming and on when it's windy or really rainy or with the snow, those brush piles are providing shelter. So they're well worth having. And to think about being an advocate for trees, since I always get worried after storms that people will want to chop all their trees down. And oh gosh, we need the trees. We need the big trees. They're Ruth Milner, the biologist that we used to work with in our habitat stewards training, would talk about what our resource that we're losing are the big trees, and the eagles and the like I said, the pileated woodpeckers, they need those big trees for nesting because the little ones aren't going to do it.
Any other questions? Well, thank you all very much. This has been recorded and it will be available shortly. I'm sure a lot of people couldn't tune in tonight. We had a lot more people register, but had
There's
other
another
concerns.
question. Is there
Sorry.
another question?
Oh, okay. Yes, here a couple more. I planted Nootka rose and it's quite invasive by sending out shoots, but I do like it. Any ideas for containment? I don't know. I've had the same problem, but I just pull them up. They're really easy to pull up, and other people love them. Can you sorry, Val, do you have other
No,
comment?
that's the yeah. I just love Nootka rose and smelling it, and so
You definitely do have to be aware when you plant
yeah.
things of which ones will.
And that's and on our sheet is it. Those are things to look at. Big spaces or little spaces if you're planting it. But yeah, the reducing lawn will give some tips on how to manage it a little bit.
Okay. Can you recommend, sorry, can you recommend good resources for acquiring native plants in large quantities?
Well, the conservation district sale that's coming up in a oh will they start? They'll
I
like
think
the end of
February. I'm not sure.
yeah. Yeah, so like in January, you can start looking at the Snohomish Conservation District website to see when their sale catalog is going to come up. Um, so because that will be because they have their catalog, what's available, and then they have their pickup day that's like in February, and so that should be available fairly soon to look at, and then ordering is like January, or is it, or December? Does it?
Yeah,
They're starting earlier now than they
yeah,
used to.
definitely go to the Snohomish Conservation District website and you will be able to sign up for their mailing list. And then you'll be notified. We'll also put it on our website, but you'll be notified if you sign up with them.
And the Skagit Conservation District has a spring sale as well.
And
And
Snohomish,
Bellingham, they
who?
Bellingham has a like a wholesale distributor place. I forgot the name of it.
Snohomish Conservation District also has a list of other places to get plants
Yeah.
because they realize a lot of people miss the sale or don't get as many as they need or want to plant in March or something. So they have good resources. Any other questions? Well, thank you all for joining us tonight. We really appreciate your time.